The tear rolling down my son Justin's cheek was a masterpiece of acting. It hung there for a moment, catching the courtroom lights, before he wiped it away with a trembling hand that seemed to beg for sympathy. He looked at the judge, his voice cracking with the perfect amount of sorrow, and demanded control over every single dollar I had earned in 40 years of hard work. He told the court I was a senile old man who had forgotten his own name and a man who was gambling away the family legacy on the internet. He thought he had won. He thought the black notebook sitting on the defense table was just the diary of a madman. But he forgot one thing. I spent my entire career catching professional liars who were far smarter than him. And that notebook wasn't a confession of my insanity. It was his prison sentence. Before I tell you how I turned this courtroom into a crime scene, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps this old man share his story. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had someone you trusted try to gaslight you? Let me know where you are watching from. My name is Harrison Caldwell. I am 72 years old. And for the first time in my life, I was sitting at the defendant's table in a county courthouse, watching my own flesh and blood try to bury me while I was still breathing. The air in the courtroom smelled of lemon polish and stale coffee, a smell I used to associate with justice, but today it smelled like betrayal. Judge Henderson sat high on the bench. They call him the Hammer, because he does not suffer fools lightly. He peered over his reading glasses, his face unreadable as he looked down at my son. Justin stood in the witness box, dressed in a suit I knew I had paid for 3 years ago. He looked every bit the concerned, grieving son. "Your Honor," Justin said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "It kills me to say this. My father was a brilliant man, a hero to me. But since Mom died 6 months ago, he is just not there anymore. The dementia has taken hold faster than we expected. He forgets where he is. He gets aggressive and the paranoia. Your Honor, it is terrifying. He thinks everyone is stealing from him." I sat there stone still. I dug my fingernails into my palms under the table until I felt the sharp bite of pain. It was the only thing keeping me grounded. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up and shout that my mind was sharper than his ever was. But I knew better. In my line of work as a forensic accountant and insurance fraud investigator, you learn one golden rule. You never interrupt your enemy when he is digging his own grave. So I let my hands shake. I let my head droop slightly to the left. I played the part he had written for me. Justin continued gaining confidence from my silence. Last month we found out he transferred $50,000 to an online casino. $50,000, Judge. That was money for his future care. He sits in his room at 3 hours in the morning, clicking buttons thinking he is winning millions. We tried to stop him, but he got violent. Violent. That was a nice touch. I'd never raised a hand to anyone in my life. The only thing I hit were the keys of a calculator. Then came Fletcher, Justin's lawyer. Fletcher was the kind of attorney who chased ambulances and smelled like cheap cologne in desperation. He walked to the center of the room, holding a clicker for the projector screen. "If it pleases the court," Fletcher said, smoothing his greasy tie, "we have documentation." The screen flickered to life. A bank statement appeared, blown up to massive proportions. It showed a withdrawal of $50,000 with the label Global Gaming Corp. A collective gasp rippled through the few spectators in the gallery. To the untrained eye, it looked damning. It looked official. But I am not an untrained eye. I spent 4 decades analyzing financial documents for the biggest insurance firms in the country. I didn't need to look twice. From where I sat, 20 FT away, I could see the pixels were wrong. The font on the transaction line was Arial, but the bank header was in Times New Roman. The spacing between the date and the transaction ID was off by 2 millimeters. It was a cut and paste job, a forgery, and a sloppy one at that. Justin had clearly done it himself. He always was lazy with the details. I noted it mentally, filing it away in the cabinet of my mind where I was building the case against him. Next slide. Fletcher barked. A photograph appeared. It was grainy, taken from a distance. It showed me standing in the middle of a vast Walmart parking lot, looking around with a bewildered, terrified expression. My arms were outstretched, my mouth open in confusion. This was taken 2 weeks ago. Fletcher narrated, his voice dripping with false pity. Mr. Caldwell wandered the parking lot for 45 minutes. He couldn't find his car. He didn't know how he got there. My client Justin had to go find him and bring him home. It is clear evidence of cognitive decline. I remembered that day perfectly. I remembered coming out of the store with my blood pressure medication. I remembered walking to row C spot 4 where I had parked my sedan, but the car wasn't there. I walked up and down the rows, panic rising in my chest, thinking it had been stolen. I called Justin. He didn't answer. For 45 minutes, I searched in the baking heat. When Justin finally drove up, he pulled out of a spot in row on the other side of the lot. He claimed I had parked there and forgotten, but I knew my routine. He had moved the car while I was inside. He had moved it, and then he had stood somewhere with a camera waiting for me to panic so he could snap that picture. It wasn't dementia, it was a setup. I looked at Brittany, my daughter-in-law, sitting in the front row behind Justin. She was wearing a modest black dress, clutching a tissue, looking like a saint. But her eyes were dry. She caught my gaze and quickly looked down, but not before I saw the flicker of triumph. She was a nurse. She knew how the system worked. She knew exactly what pills to give me, to make me look confused, to make my hands shake, to make me sleep for 18 hours a day. She was the architect of my physical decline, just as Justin was the architect of my financial ruin. Thaddeus Fletcher turned off the projector. Your Honor, the evidence is overwhelming. Mr. Caldwell is a danger to himself and his estate. We are asking for immediate and full conservatorship to be granted to his son, Justin Caldwell. We are asking that Mr. Caldwell be placed in a secure facility for his own safety and that all financial assets be transferred to Justin's control to prevent further squandering. Judge Henderson rubbed his temples. He looked tired. He looked at me. Mr. Caldwell, do you have anything to say, or does your attorney wish to speak? I didn't have an attorney. I had fired the one Justin hired for me because I knew he was in on it. I was representing myself, which usually is a fool's errand, but nobody knew the numbers like I did. I stood up slowly. I grabbed the edge of the table to steady myself, exaggerating the tremor in my legs. I needed them to underestimate me for just a little longer. Your Honor, I said, making my voice sound thin and raspy. My son makes a compelling case. The pictures, the documents, they look very frightening. Justin nodded vigorously from the witness stand, encouraging my surrender. I continued. But before you make a ruling that will end my life as a free man, I have one request. The judge raised an eyebrow. And what is that? I pointed a shaking finger at the black ledger sitting in front of me. I admit my memory isn't what it used to be. That is why I started writing things down. Justin and his lawyer say I am hoarding imaginary gold and hiding millions in Swiss accounts. They say this notebook proves I am delusional. I paused, coughing into my fist. I am willing to submit this notebook into evidence, Your Honor. I am willing to let you read my delusions, but I ask that the bailiff read page 45 out loud to the court. Just page 45. Justin smirked. He leaned back, crossing his arms. I could see the thought bubble above his head. He thought page 45 was the map to the buried treasure I had invented. He thought I was handing him the keys to the kingdom. He thought he had won. The judge nodded to the bailiff. Very well. Bring the notebook here. As the bailiff walked over to take the leather-bound book from my hands, I slumped back into my chair. The adrenaline was pounding through my veins, but I kept my face blank. During the brief transition, the court went into a short recess while the judge examined the first few pages. Justin stepped down from the witness stand and walked past my table on his way to the water cooler. He stopped right next to me. He leaned down, pretending to check if I needed water. His breath was hot against my ear. "Dad, don't worry." He whispered, his voice low and venomous. Sunset. Nursing home has a special wing for difficult cases. The rooms are soundproof. Nobody will hear you scream when you realize nobody is coming to visit ever. He pulled back, patting my shoulder gently for the cameras and the judge to see, offering me that sick, victorious smile. I looked up at him for the first time in 6 months. I let the mask slip. I stopped my hand from shaking. I straightened my spine. And I looked him dead in the eye with the cold, hard stare of the investigator who had put away fraudsters who stole 10 times more than he ever could. "You better hope the prison has good soundproofing too, son," I whispered back. His smile faltered. Confusion flickered across his face. He didn't understand. He didn't know that the game had changed. He didn't know that while he was playing checkers, I had been playing three-dimensional chess. The bailiff cleared his throat. The judge banged his gavel. The recess was over. Justin scrambled back to his seat, looking back at me with a frown, trying to process what I had just said. But it was too late. The trap was sprung. The bailiff opened the book to page 45. The room went silent, and the reading of the list began. To understand how I ended up in that defendant's chair, staring down a prison sentence disguised as a nursing home, you have to go back 6 months. It was the day we buried Martha, my wife of 45 years. The rain that morning wasn't the cinematic kind that washes away sorrow. It was a cold, miserable drizzle that soaked into your bones and stayed there. The house felt too big, too quiet, the silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy like the air before a thunderstorm. I sat in my armchair staring at the empty space on the sofa where she used to knit, feeling a kind of loneliness that physical pain can't even compare to. Justin and Brittany stood in my living room. They looked devastated, dressed in black, their faces somber. At the time, I thought they were crying for their mother. Now I know they were crying because they realized how much debt they were in and saw me as their only way out. Back at the house, over stale sandwiches and lukewarm coffee provided by the neighbors, Justin made his pitch. He pulled a chair close to my knees, touching, invading my personal space in a way that was meant to feel intimate but felt suffocated. He held my hand. His palms were sweating, a physiological reaction I used to look for when interviewing suspects, but I dismissed it as grief. "Dad," he said, looking around the living room like he was an architect measuring it for renovation. "We hate seeing you like this. So alone in this big place with all these memories haunting you. It is not healthy. The market is terrible right now, frozen solid. Our mortgage is killing us, and we are barely scraping by. What if we rented our place out and moved in here just for a while to help with the bills, to keep you company?" Brittany chimed in right on cue. She touched my arm with her nurse's hands, cool and professional. "I can cook for you, Harrison. No more frozen dinners, healthy meals. I can monitor your blood pressure, manage your medications. We just want to take care of you." It sounded perfect. It sounded like family. I was grieving. I was weak. I was desperate for the noise of life to fill the silence Martha left behind. I said yes. That single word was the first nail in my coffin. They moved in a week later. It started small, subtle, like a slow leak in a tire you do not notice until you are driving on the rim at 60 miles an hour. The first week I came home from a morning walk to the park. I punched in the code for the alarm system, the birthday of my first dog, a code I had used for 20 years. The keypad flashed red. A siren pierced the air, screaming through the neighborhood. My heart hammered against my ribs. I thought I was losing my mind. Justin came running out of the kitchen, looking annoyed, holding a slice of pizza. He punched in a new code and the noise died. "Oh, Dad." Didn't we tell you? We changed it to something easier for us to remember. Your old code was too predictable. We told you at dinner last night. You must have forgotten. I stood there, my ears still ringing. I hadn't forgotten. Nobody told me. We hadn't even had dinner together the night before. They had ordered takeout and eaten in their room. But I let it slide. I thought maybe grief was clouding my memory. It was just a code after all. Then came the second week my study. That room was my sanctuary. It was where I kept my files, my old cases, my humidor, and the framed combinations from the insurance board. It smelled of old paper and cedar. I walked in one Tuesday morning to find my mahogany desk gone. My leather chair was missing. In their place stood a cheap particle board table and a gaming computer with 3 glowing monitors, humming with the sound of cooling fans. Justin was sitting there, feet up on the table, wearing a headset. "Dad, I need a workspace," he said, without looking up from his screen. "You are retired. You don't need an office anymore. I moved your stuff to the basement." The basement. My life's work. 40 years of forensic accounting records. Shoved into damp cardboard boxes next to the leaking water heater. I felt a surge of anger, but Brittany appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Harrison, don't be difficult. Justin needs to focus to get our finances back on track. We are doing this for the family. You don't want to be selfish. Do you selfish?" The word hung in the air. I retreated to the living room feeling smaller, less significant in my own home. By the third week, the house didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like I was a guest who had overstayed his welcome. Martha's things began to vanish. Her favorite crystal vase that sat on the mantelpiece was gone. The painting of the lighthouse we bought on our honeymoon in Maine disappeared from the hallway. When I asked, Brittany would shrug her eyes wide and innocent. It broke. "Harrison, don't you remember knocking it over with your cane yesterday? We cleaned up the glass together." I didn't remember because I hadn't done it. I didn't even use a cane inside the house. But the way she said it with such concern, such pity, made me question my own reality. Was I slipping? Was the grief eating holes in my brain? But the worst moment, the moment the little alarm bell in the back of my forensic mind started ringing loud and clear, was the clock. It was a grandfather clock, late 19th century solid mahogany with brass weights. It stood in the hallway like a sentinel. It hadn't worked in years. The gears were seized, but Martha loved it. She used to say it was right twice a day, and that was enough for her. One morning I walked down the hall and stopped. The spot where the clock stood was empty. Just a pale rectangle on the wall where the sun hadn't hit the paint for 30 years. The carpet still held the indentations of its heavy feet. I found Brittany in the kitchen, blending a green smoothie that smelled like lawn clippings and chemicals. "Where's the clock?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of rage and fear. She didn't even turn around. The motor of the blender whirred, drowning out the world. I waited. She poured the sludge into a glass and turned to me, wiping a spot of green from the counter. "Brittany, the clock." "Where is it?" She looked at me with a pitying smile. The kind of smile you give a toddler who dropped his ice cream cone in the dirt. "Oh, Dad. We talked about this. You told Justin to take it to the repair shop last Tuesday. Remember you said it was just gathering dust and taking up space. You insisted he loaded into the truck." I stared at her, my hands clenched at my sides. I had never said that. I would never let Justin touch that clock. He was clumsy and careless, and he had no appreciation for antiques. I knew with absolute certainty that conversation had never happened. "No," I said firmly, channeling the voice I used to use when interrogating fraudsters. "I never said that. Tell me where it is." Brittany sighed, a long, exaggerated sound of exhaustion. She pulled a small notepad from her scrub pocket and made a show of writing something down. See, this is exactly what Dr. Evans warned us about. The memory gaps. They are starting to happen more often. You are getting confused, Harrison. It is called confabulation. Your brain is filling in the blanks with paranoia. Maybe you should go lie down. You look flushed. She turned back to the sink, dismissing me as if I were a piece of furniture. I stood there, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. She wasn't just lying, she was rewriting history. She was planting seeds of doubt in the fertile soil of my grief. In my line of work, we call it gaslighting, but usually it is a husband doing it to a wife to hide an affair. Here it was, a son and a daughter-in-law doing it to a father to steal a life. I didn't go lie down. I walked back to the hallway. I knelt down, my knees cracking, and looked at the floor where the clock used to be. There were drag marks, heavy ones, gouging into the hardwood floor next to the rug, and a scratch on the door frame that looked fresh, exposing raw wood. If they had taken it to a repair shop, they had done it violently, hurriedly. They hadn't taken it to be fixed. They had taken it to be sold. I knew it in my gut. Just like I knew that the green smoothie she handed me later that afternoon tasted slightly bitter, different than the ones before. That was 6 months ago, the beginning of the end. Or so they thought. They saw an old man losing his grip. They didn't see the investigator starting to take notes. The first time you realize you are no longer the master of your own life, it does not happen with a bang or a shout. It happens with a simple electronic beep in a fluorescent-lit pharmacy. It was a Tuesday afternoon about 3 months into my captivity, disguised as cohabitation. I stood at the counter of the local CVS, a place I had been visiting for 20 years. Sarah, the pharmacist who knew my dosage better than I did, handed me the small white bag containing my Listen. It was my blood pressure medication essential for keeping my heart from exploding, especially living under the same roof as my son. I slid my Visa Gold card into the chip reader. It was a card I had held since 1995, a card with a $30,000 limit that I paid off in full every single month. I waited for the familiar approved message. Instead, the machine let out a harsh, low buzz. "Declined," Era said softly, looking at her screen with a furrowed brow. I frowned. "That is impossible, Sarah. Try it again." Maybe the chip is dirty. I rubbed the card on my sleeve and inserted it again. Buzz declined, contact issuer. A line was forming behind me. I could feel the heat rising in my neck, the prickle of embarrassment that I hadn't felt since I was a broke college student. Sarah lowered her voice, trying to save my dignity. "I'm Caldwell. It says insufficient funds and over limit." "Do you have another card?" I checked my wallet. I had cash, barely enough, tucked in a hidden compartment Justin hadn't found yet. I paid the $40 with trembling hands and walked out to the parking lot where Justin was waiting in my car, scrolling on his phone. He looked up as I opened the door. "You got the pills good. Let's go. I have a meeting." I didn't move to put on my seatbelt. My card was declined. Justin. He didn't flinch. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look worried. He just sighed like he was explaining quantum physics to a toddler. "Oh yeah, I meant to tell you. I got an email about that. It is just a system glitch. The bank is upgrading their security protocols, and they froze a bunch of accounts by accident. It is happening to everyone. A system glitch. In my 40 years of forensic accounting, I have investigated thousands of bank errors. Do you know how many times a bank accidentally freezes a high-standing account for a security upgrade without notifying the client by phone zero?" I stared at him. It said insufficient funds, Justin, not a security freeze. He rolled his eyes, starting the engine. "Dad, don't get paranoid. It is a coding error. The system reads the freeze as a zero balance. I will call them when we get home and sort it out. You don't have to worry your head about it." When we got back to the house, he made a show of it. He sat at the kitchen table, put his phone on speaker, and dialed a number. He didn't dial the number on the back of my card. I noticed that immediately. He dialed a number from his contacts. The voice on the other end was professional smooth. "Thank you for calling First National. This is Jennifer. How can I help you?" "Hi, Jennifer. This is Justin Caldwell, acting on behalf of Harrison Caldwell. We are having trouble with the visa ending in 4022. "Oh, I see here," the voice replied instantly. "Yes, Mr. Caldwell, we see the error. It is a firewall issue on our end. We are working to resolve it within 48 hours. Please apologize to your father for us." Justin hung up and gave me a smug smile. "See, told you. Just a glitch." I nodded slowly and went to my room. I sat on the edge of the bed, my heart racing not from blood pressure, but from the adrenaline of the hunt. The call was fake. The cadence was wrong. No bank representative answers that fast. No representative identifies a firewall issue without asking for security questions, a social security number, or a mother's maiden name. And definitely no bank representative apologizes with that much empathy. It was a performance. Jennifer was probably Brittany on her break at the hospital, or one of his gambling buddies using a voice changer. He wasn't just spending my money, he was maxing out everything I had. But to do that, he needed to control the flow of information. He needed to make sure I never saw a statement, never saw a late notice, never saw the foreclosure warnings that were surely being printed and mailed. I knew what I had to do. I had to become a ghost in my own house. That night I waited. I lay in bed fully dressed under the quilt, listening to the house settle. At 11:00, the television downstairs turned off. At midnight, I heard them go to their room. I waited 2 more hours just to be safe. At 3 in the morning, the house was a tomb. I slipped out of bed. My joints popped, but I knew which floorboards creaked and which were silent. I had memorized the soundscape of this house over 30 years. I crept to the top of the stairs and looked down. A shadow moved in the foyer. It was Justin. He wasn't asleep. He was moving with purpose. He was wearing his sweatpants and a hoodie. He didn't go to the kitchen for water. He went to the front door. He unlocked it silently and stepped out onto the porch. I moved down 3 steps to get a better angle. Through the side window, I watched him. He walked to the mailbox at the end of the driveway. It was illegal to tamper with mail of federal offense, but my son had clearly graduated from moral gray areas to felonies a long time ago. He opened the box and pulled out a stack of envelopes. He didn't bring them inside. He didn't sort them on the counter. He walked around the side of the house toward the large recycling bins. I hurried to the guest bedroom window, which overlooked the side yard. In the pale moonlight, I saw him crouched by the bins. He had a small handheld shredder, a battery-operated one. I watched as he fed envelope after envelope into the machine. The whining grind of the shredder was muffled by the wind, but I could see the paper turning into confetti. He wasn't just shredding junk mail. He was shredding envelopes with red, urgent stamps. He was shredding the bank statements. He was shredding the life I had built. When he was done, he didn't put the shreds in our recycling bin. That would be too risky. If I tipped the bin over, I might see the strips. No, he put the shredded remains into a black trash bag, tied it tight, and walked it over to the neighbor's bin, lifting their lid and burying his crime under their garbage. Smart. Evil, but smart. He came back inside, locked the door, and went back upstairs. I held my breath as he passed my door, praying he wouldn't check on me. He didn't. He was too arrogant. He thought I was asleep, medicated, and confused. I waited until I heard his bedroom door click shut. Then I went back to my bed, but I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, connecting the dots. The declined card wasn't an isolated incident. It was the symptom of a total financial blockade. He had cut the phone lines, metaphorically speaking. He had intercepted the mail. He had spoofed the customer service calls. He was creating a dome around me, a controlled environment where the only information I received was the information he provided. He was isolating me. He was making me blind and deaf to the world so he could pick my bones clean. I thought about the glitch. I thought about the vitamin supplements Brittany had started giving me. I thought about the missing clock. It all fit a pattern I had seen in a dozen fraud cases. The perpetrator isolates the victim, disorients them, cuts off their resources, and then when the victim is helpless, they take everything. But they usually do it to strangers. They don't do it to the man who taught them how to ride a bike. They don't do it to the man who paid for their college tuition. I rolled over and looked at the picture of Martha on my nightstand. I promised her I would look after him. I promised I would be a good father. But looking at the empty space where my dignity used to be, I realized that being a good father now meant something very different. It meant stopping him. The next morning, I came down to breakfast. Justin was drinking coffee, scrolling on his tablet, looking relaxed and innocent. "Morning, Dad," he said cheerfully. "Did you sleep well?" I poured myself a cup of coffee, keeping my hand steady. I slept like a baby Justin. He smiled. "Good." "Oh, hey, I checked on that bank thing. They said it should be fixed by Friday. Just sit tight." I smiled back, a weak, confused old man smile. "Thanks, son. I don't know what I would do without you handling these things. I really am getting too old for this numbers game." He winked at me. "That is what I am here for, Dad. To take the burden off your shoulders." I took a sip of coffee. It was bitter. He had no idea. He thought he was taking the burden off my shoulders, but what he was actually doing was putting the handcuffs on his own wrists. He had cut off my information, yes, but he had forgotten that I knew how to find things that people wanted to hide. If he was going to play dirty, I was going to play forensic. And the first step was to find out exactly how deep this hole was. The layout of my house was something I had memorized over 30 years of pacing its halls during sleepless nights of casework. I knew that the ventilation duct in the master bedroom connected directly to the laundry room. And I knew that the door between the kitchen and the garage was not as soundproof as the contractor had promised back in 1998. That architectural flaw became my lifeline 3 nights after the mailbox incident. It was just past 1 hour in the morning. The house was vibrating with a silence that felt artificial, the kind of quiet that hides a storm. I was lying in bed, staring at the shadows the streetlights cast on the ceiling, calculating the compound interest on the debt my son was likely racking up in my name. Then I heard a thud. Not a falling object, but the heavy, frustrated impact of a fist against a solid surface. It came from beneath me from the garage. I slipped out of bed, my feet finding the carpet without a sound. I did not need a cane. I did not need a walker. Those were props I used when they were watching. In the dark, I moved with the silent efficiency of the man who used to tail insurance fraudsters through the back alleys of Chicago. I made my way to the kitchen, bypassing the creaky floorboard near the refrigerator, and pressed my ear against the cold metal of the fire door leading to the garage. Justin was shouting. He was trying to keep his voice down, but the desperation was making him loud. The panic in his tone was jagged raw. It wasn't the voice of a man arguing with a customer service representative. It was the voice of a man pleading for his life. "I told you I need 2 more weeks, Justin hissed. His voice echoed slightly off the concrete floor. "No, listen to me? Listen, the old man is practically a vegetable. I have the paperwork ready. The power of attorney is sitting on the kitchen counter right now. I just need to get him to sign it on a good day." I held my breath. Power of attorney. The golden key. The legal weapon that would strip me of my rights and hand him total control over my finances, my medical decisions, and my life. If he got that signature, I wouldn't just be a guest in my own home. I would be his property. There was a pause as he listened to the person on the other end. I could hear him pacing the scuff of his sneakers on the oil-stained floor. "Do not threaten me, S." Justin snapped, his voice trembling. "I know what I owe you." The house alone is appraised at $800,000. It is free and clear. No mortgage. Once I have the signature, I can take a line of credit against the equity within 48 hours. You will get your money plus the VIG. Just call off your dogs. My blood ran cold. He wasn't dealing with banks. Banks don't have guys named S. Banks don't have dogs to call off. My son was in deep with loan sharks. He had gambled or borrowed his way into a hole so deep he couldn't see the sky. And he was using my life's work, my home, my sanctuary, as the ladder to climb out. I heard a metallic crash like a wrench being thrown against a tool chest. I am not stalling, Justin screamed, losing all volume control. If you come near the house, you ruin everything. The old man is suspicious. He is a retired investigator, for God's sake. He has instincts. If he sees you, he locks down. You have to let me handle this my way. I will drug him if I have to. I will guide his hand on the paper if I have to. You will get your 800 grand. I pulled away from the door, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with my medication. It wasn't just theft. It wasn't just greed. It was survival. He was willing to erase me to save himself. He was willing to drug me into a stupor to pay off a gambling debt. I retreated to my room, moving backward through the shadows like a ghost. I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands trembling. I needed a plan. I couldn't just call the police. It was his word against mine, and he had spent months painting me as senile to the neighbors, the doctors, and probably the local precinct. If I called the cops now, he would tell them I was having a paranoid episode. He would show them the empty pill bottles he was surely hoarding. He would win. I needed to test the boundaries of my prison. I needed to know exactly how tight the leash was. The next morning, I dressed in my best suit. It was a charcoal gray three-piece I used to wear for court depositions. It hung a little loose on me now, after months of Brittany's healthy cooking, which seemed to consist mostly of broth and iceberg lettuce, but it still commanded a certain authority. I tied my tie with a perfect Windsor knot, combed my white hair back, and walked into the kitchen at 8 sharp. Justin and Brittany were at the table. The smell of burnt toast hung in the air. When I walked in, they both froze. Brittany's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Justin looked up from his phone, his eyes widening. "Whoa, Dad!" Justin said, a nervous laugh bubbling up. "You look sharp. Going to a funeral." I poured myself a cup of coffee, standing tall. "No, Justin. I'm going to see Arthur Miller." The room went silent. Arthur Miller is my estate lawyer. He had drafted my will 10 years ago. He was a shark in a suit, a man who didn't believe in gray areas. Justin stood up slowly, putting his phone on the table face down. "Why do you need to see Arthur?" I took a sip of the bitter coffee. "I need to review my will," I said calmly, "and I want to discuss the terms of a power of attorney. I think it is time we formalize things, don't you?" I saw the hope flare in his eyes, followed immediately by suspicion. He exchanged a quick, loaded glance with Brittany. This was what he wanted, but not on my terms. Not with Arthur Miller involved. Arthur would spot the coercion in a second. Arthur would audit the accounts before letting me sign anything. "That is a great idea, Dad," Justin said, moving around the table to stand between me and the back door. "But you don't need to bother Arthur. He is so expensive and he is halfway across town. We have a family lawyer now, Mr. Fletcher. He can come here. He can handle everything in the comfort of your living room." I set the cup down hard. "No, I trust Arthur. I'm going to drive over there this morning." I turned toward the hook by the door where I kept my car keys. They weren't there. The hook was empty. I turned back to Justin. "Where are my keys?" Justin's face shifted. The mask of the concerned son slipped, revealing the desperate debtor underneath. He crossed his arms, his posture defensive dominant. "Dad, we talked about this." "You know we did." Dr. Evans said you shouldn't be driving anymore, not with your episodes. I stared at him. I haven't had an episode, Justin. I drove last week. You got lost in the parking lot. Brittany chimed in, her voice dripping with that sickly, sweet condescension. Remember you called us crying. You didn't know which car was yours? Gaslighting textbook. They were fabricating memories in real time. I did not get lost, I said, my voice rising. Give me my keys. I am leaving. Justin stepped forward, invading my personal space. He was taller than me, now heavier. He used his physical presence as a wall. You're not going anywhere, Dad. You are agitated. Look at you. You are shaking. You are not in a condition to be making legal decisions, let alone driving a two-tone vehicle. I am perfectly lucid, I snapped. Are you just encountered yesterday? You thought it was 1995? You asked where Mom was. I hadn't. I knew exactly what year it was. I knew exactly where Martha was. But as I looked into his eyes, I saw the threat. If I pushed past him, he would restrain me. He would claim it was for my own safety. He would call the paramedics and tell them I was having a psychotic break. He would have me sedated before I reached the end of the driveway. I was trapped. The house was no longer my property. It was my holding cell. And the warden was my own son, desperate to sell me out to a man named S. I took a deep breath, forcing my shoulders to relax. I needed to de-escalate. I needed to make him think he had won so he would lower his guard. I rubbed my forehead, feigning confusion. I didn't ask about Mom. You did. Harrison? Brittany said softly, coming to stand beside Justin. You were very upset. I slumped my shoulders. Maybe you were right. I didn't sleep well. I feel a bit foggy. Justin relaxed instantly. He patted my shoulder, the tension leaving his frame. See, it is okay, Dad. We're just looking out for you. Tell you what, why don't you go change into something comfortable? Brittany will make you some tea. We can call Mr. Fletcher later in the week. There is no rush. No rush. He was lying. He needed the money in 2 weeks, but he needed me compliant more than he needed me fast. Okay, I whispered, looking at the floor. I will go change. I turned and walked back toward the stairs. I felt their eyes on my back. They thought they had broken me. They thought the old man was confused and helpless. But as I climbed the stairs, clutching the banister, my mind was racing. I knew the stakes now. This wasn't just about money, it was about my life. If I signed that power of attorney, I was dead. Maybe not physically, not immediately, but I would be erased. I went into my room and closed the door. I didn't change my clothes. I went to the window and looked out at the street. Freedom was 20 yards away. But it might as well have been on the moon. I needed a way out. But more than that, I needed proof. If I was going to take them down, I couldn't just escape. I had to catch them. I needed to know exactly how they were planning to do it. And I suspected the answer lay in the new bottle of blue pills Brittany had placed on my nightstand the day before. Vitamin supplements, she had called them. I picked up the bottle. It had no label, just a handwritten sticker that said Dad Morning. I opened it and poured a pill into my hand. It was a distinctive shape, a pentagon with a score line down the middle. Vitamins don't look like this. I pocketed the pill. I needed to identify it. And to do that, I needed access to a computer that wasn't monitored by my son. I needed to get out of the house, and I knew exactly how to do it. I would have to wait for the poison to do its work, or at least pretend that it had. The bottle appeared on the breakfast table the next morning, sitting innocently next to my burnt toast and lukewarm coffee. It was an amber prescription vial, but the label had been peeled off, leaving only a sticky residue and a piece of masking tape with Dad written in Brittany's bubbly, childish handwriting. Inside rattled a dozen small pentagonal blue pills. Here we go, Harrison. Brittany said, her voice chirping with that professional cheerfulness she used on patients she considered terminal. Dr. Evans called in a new script. It is a high-potency cognitive supplement, a mix of vitamins and a mild mood stabilizer to help with your agitation. He says it will help clear that fog you have been complaining about. I hadn't complained about any fog. The only fog in this house was the one they were manufacturing. Justin was leaning against the counter watching me over the rim of his mug. His eyes were hard, calculating. He wasn't asking me to take it. He was daring me not to. If I refused, it would be proof of my agitation, another check mark on the list for the competency hearing. If I fought, he would force it down my throat. I knew that from the desperation I had heard in the garage. So I reached out my hand, trembling slightly, partly from fear, partly from the act I was already refining, and picked up the pill. It looked harmless, just compressed powder and dye. But as I swallowed it with a gulp of water, I felt a cold stone drop into my stomach. The effects didn't hit me all at once. It was a slow, suffocating tide. By the afternoon of the first day, the edges of my vision started to blur. I felt a heavy lethargy in my limbs, as if gravity had suddenly doubled. I sat in my armchair intending to read the newspaper, but I found myself staring at the same paragraph for an hour, unable to make the words connect into sentences. By the second day, the world had turned into a terrifying, disjointed movie reel. I would be walking to the kitchen, and suddenly I would be standing in the hallway, unsure of why I had left my room. My heart would palpitate wildly for no reason, thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird, then slow down to a crawl that made me gasp for air. By the third day, I was a prisoner in my own body. I sat at the kitchen table watching Justin and Brittany move around me. They were talking, but their voices sounded like they were coming from underwater, distorted, slow. "He is out of it," Justin said, waving a hand in front of my face. I didn't blink. I couldn't. My eyelids felt like lead. "It is working faster than I thought," Brittany replied, checking my pulse with a cold thumb. "His pressure is tanking. We need to be careful with the dosage. We don't want him explicitly dead yet. We need the signature first." I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab the steak knife on the counter and defend myself, but my brain couldn't send the signal to my hand. I was trapped behind a wall of chemical silence. I was witnessing my own murder in slow motion. That night, lying in bed, feeling the room spin in nauseating circles, a memory fought its way through the chemical sludge. It was 1998. I was investigating a series of suspicious life insurance claims at a hospice facility in Ohio. There was a nurse there, a sweet motherly woman who baked cookies for the staff. Her patients loved her, but they kept dying of natural causes weeks after changing their wills. I remembered reviewing the toxicology reports. I remembered the cocktail she used. Not enough to kill instantly, but enough to induce a state of pliability, confusion, and eventually systemic failure. She called it the mercy mix. Brittany wasn't giving me vitamins. She was chemically lobotomizing me. A surge of survival instinct, sharp and primal, pierced through the fog. If I took one more of those blue pills, Harrison Caldwell would cease to exist. The man who had built a career on logic and precision would be replaced by a drooling vegetable who would sign anything just to make the room stop spinning. I had to stop taking them, but I couldn't refuse. Refusal meant force. Refusal meant they would switch to injections, and I couldn't fake an injection. I had to cheat. The next morning, day 4, I shuffled into the kitchen. I didn't have to pretend to look wrecked. My skin was gray, my eyes were sunken, and my hands shook with a violent tremor that was entirely real. "Time for your vitamin, Dad." Brittany cooped, shaking a blue pill into her palm. I sat down heavily. I took the glass of water. I took the pill. I put it in my mouth, but I didn't swallow. I remembered a trick a convict had told me once during a prison interview. He called it cheating. You lift your tongue to the roof of your mouth, creating a small pocket between your upper gum and your cheek. You slide the pill in there, clamp your tongue down, and swallow the water. I took a large gulp of water. I threw my head back, letting my throat bob visibly. "Good job, Harrison," Brittany said, patting my back. She watched me for a second, checking for the swallow reflex. Satisfied, she turned back to the sink to rinse a dish. The moment her back was turned, I brought the napkin to my mouth, pretending to wipe a dribble of water from my chin. I spit the blue pentagon into the folds of the paper towel. I crushed it with my thumb, smearing the blue powder into the white fiber so it wouldn't be recognized if she glanced at the trash. I did the same thing on day 5 and day 6. The withdrawal was brutal. My body screamed for the sedative it had quickly become dependent on. I had headaches that felt like an axe splitting my skull. I had the shakes. I sweat through my sheets. But slowly, agonizingly, the fog began to lift. By the 7th day, I woke up and the ceiling wasn't spinning. I looked at the clock and I knew what time it was. I knew who I was. The investigator was back. But this was the most dangerous part. I was lucid. I was angry, and every fiber of my being wanted to march downstairs and confront them. But I knew I couldn't. If they knew I was sane, they would change tactics. They would become violent, or worse, they would realize their vitamins weren't working and up the dosage to something lethal. So I put on the performance of a lifetime. I shuffled when I walked, dragging my left foot slightly. I let my mouth hang open just a fraction. I deliberately spilled coffee on my shirt and stared at the stain with a vacant expression. When Justin spoke to me, I waited 5 seconds before answering, and then I would answer a question he hadn't asked. "Hey, Dad, can you pass the sugar?" he asked one morning. I looked at the sugar bowl, then at the window. "It is supposed to rain on Tuesday." I mumbled, my voice slurring. Justin looked at Brittany and grinned a cruel, predatory grin. He is cooked Brit. His brain is mush. Brittany laughed a sound that made my skin crawl. "Good. That means we can move up the timeline. I'll call Fletcher. We can probably get him to sign the papers on Thursday. He won't even know what he is holding." They stopped whispering. They stopped going to the garage to make phone calls. They discussed their plans right in front of me, talking over my head as if I were a houseplant. I learned about the crypto wallet where Justin was hiding the loan money. I learned about the overdue payments on his Porsche. I learned that Brittany was stealing supplies from the hospital to keep their expenses down. They thought they had isolated me. They thought they had broken me. But all they had done was give me a front row seat to their conspiracy. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the undercover agent in my own home. But I needed hard evidence. I needed to know exactly what was in those blue pills to prove intent to harm. And I needed to know where the money was going. I needed to get out of the house. And I knew exactly how to do it. I'd been cheeking the pills for 3 days, saving 2 of them wrapped in tissue paper inside the hollow leg of my bedside lamp. I had a sample. Now I needed a lab, and I needed a computer that wasn't monitored by my son's spyware. I waited for the right moment. It came on a Thursday, the day they planned to make me sign my life away. They had a meeting with Fletcher in the afternoon. They would be gone for 2 hours. That was all I needed. I waited until I heard the car pull out of the driveway. I counted to 60. Then I stood up, straightened my back, and walked to the back door. The old Harrison Caldwell was back, and he was going to work. The sound of the tires crunching on the gravel driveway as Justin and Brittany's car pulled away was the sweetest music I had heard in months. They were heading to see Fletcher the lawyer, probably to finalize the paperwork that would strip me of my human rights. They thought I was upstairs drooling into a pillow, lost in a chemically induced fog. They didn't know that the fog had lifted. I waited exactly 60 seconds, counting the beats of my own heart. Then I moved. I didn't go to the front door. The smart lock recorded every entry and exit, and a notification would pop up on Justin's phone before I even reached the sidewalk. I went to the guest bedroom, the one facing the overgrown backyard. 3 nights ago, under the cover of a thunderstorm, I had lubricated the window hinges with a drop of cooking oil I had stolen from the pantry. I slid the latch. The window opened silently, gliding upward like it was floating on air. I popped the screen out, something I had loosened days ago, and climbed over the sill. My 72-year-old joints protested a sharp ache in my hip, reminding me that I wasn't young anymore. But the adrenaline surged through me, masking the pain. I dropped onto the soft earth of the flower bed, ruining my freshly pressed trousers. But I didn't care. I was out. I kept to the tree line, moving through the neighbors' yards until I was 3 blocks away. Only then did I step onto the sidewalk and begin to walk properly. I had to blend in. I wasn't an escapee. I was just an old man taking a stroll. My destination was the public library on 4th Street, a brick fortress of information that my son, in his arrogance, had likely forgotten even existed. The library was cool and smelled of dust and floor wax. I bypassed the front desk and went straight to the back, to the row of public computers used by students and job seekers. I chose the terminal in the corner, the one with the screen angled away from the security cameras. I pulled a crumpled $20 bill from my sock, my emergency fund, and bought a guest pass. No login tied to my name, no digital footprint leading back to Harrison Caldwell. I sat down and let my fingers hover over the keyboard. For a moment, I wasn't the victim. I was the investigator again. I was the man who had brought down the biggest insurance fraud ring in the tri-state area in '98. I cracked my knuckles and went to work. First, the money. Justin had intercepted my mail, but he couldn't intercept the national credit bureaus if you knew the backdoor admin passwords. I hadn't worked as a forensic accountant for 40 years without learning how the system was built. I navigated to a legacy credit reporting portal, one used by auditors. My old credentials should have been purged a decade ago, but I knew the IT director back then. He was lazy. He never scrubbed the admin list. I typed in my old username, password, enter. The screen blinked, loading, and then access granted. I pulled my full credit report. It was a bloodbath. My credit score, once a pristine 820, had plummeted to 540. I scrolled down to the recent activity and gasped. There it was, a secured loan taken out 3 weeks ago. Not from a bank, from a private lending firm in Nevada, the kind that charges predatory interest rates and breaks kneecaps if you miss a payment. $200, $1,000. The collateral listed was my pension fund. He had forged my signature. I pulled up the digital copy of the loan agreement. The signature was good, almost perfect, but the loop on the H was too tight. It was a trace job. He had used a light box to trace my signature from an old check. I tracked the disbursement. The money hit my account on a Tuesday and was moved out 10 minutes later. Where did it go? I followed the transaction routing number. It wasn't a bank transfer. It was a wire to a crypto exchange. I logged into a blockchain explorer. I didn't need a password for this. The ledger is public if you have the wallet address. I watched the flow of my life savings. $200, $1,000 converted into Bitcoin, then tumbled through a mixer to hide the source, and finally deposited into a private wallet. He wasn't just paying debts. He was hiding assets. He was stealing my pension and parking it somewhere I couldn't touch. Probably planning to claim I had gambled it away when the question started. But the money was only half the story. The money was the motive. The method was in my pocket. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the tissue containing the blue pill I had chewed that morning. It was small, innocent looking. I typed the imprint code into a pharmaceutical identifier database, PL4442. The search results loaded instantly. My breath hitched in my throat. Warfarin sodium 5-malmnimlanarins, Wararin. It wasn't a vitamin. It wasn't a cognitive supplement. It was a potent anticoagulant, rat poison in high enough doses. It was used to treat blood clots, but for a man with normal blood viscosity like me, it was a ticking time bomb. I scrolled down to the interactions. Do not take with sedatives or benzodiazepines. I thought about the mood stabilizer Brittany said was mixed in. I researched the other pills she had been giving me at night, the white ones. They were benzodiazepines. The combination was lethal, but not in the way a gunshot is lethal. It was subtle. The sedatives would make me dizzy, prone to stumbling. The warfarin would thin my blood to the consistency of water. If I fell, if I bumped my head on the coffee table, if I slipped in the shower, I wouldn't just get a bruise. I would have a massive intracranial hemorrhage. I would bleed out into my own brain before the ambulance even arrived. And given my age, the dementia diagnosis they were planting, and the clumsiness they were documenting, the coroner would rule it an accidental fall. A tragic end for a confused old man. My hands started to shake, and this time it wasn't an act. They weren't just trying to steal my house, they were actively engineering my death. But why now? Why the rush? If they had the power of attorney, they could bleed my accounts dry over years. Why risk a murder? There had to be something else, a bigger payout. I went back to the financial database. I searched for recent inquiries on my Social Security number. There was a hard credit pull 35 days ago from a major life insurance carrier. I navigated to the carrier's portal. I didn't have the login, but I knew the default password protocol for new accounts created by third-party brokers. It was usually the client's birth date and the last 4 digits of the social. I typed it in. Access denied. I tried Justin's birth date. Access granted. The policy popped up on the screen. It was a term life policy effective date 1 month ago. The premium was astronomical, paid for by the crypto account I had just found. The face value was $2 million. But the kicker, the detail that made my stomach turn over, was the rider attached to the policy, the double indemnity clause. If the insured dies by accidental, means the payout doubles $4 million. If I died of a heart attack in my sleep, they got $2 million. But if I fell down the stairs, if I slipped in the bathroom and cracked my skull because I was dizzy from sedatives and bled out because of the warfarin, they got $4 million. That was why Brittany was upping the dosage. That was why Justin was so desperate to keep me isolated. They didn't want me to die peacefully. They needed me to die violently. They needed an accident. I sat back in the plastic library chair, the hum of the computers around me fading into white noise. I looked at the screen, at the cold, hard numbers that put a price tag on my life. My son, the boy I had taught to fish, the boy I had held when he scraped his knee, had calculated exactly how much my death was worth. He had leveraged my pension to buy the policy that would pay off upon my murder. It was a closed loop of evil. I printed everything, the loan documents, the crypto transfers, the pill identification page, the insurance policy, the printer words spitting out the pages of my own murder plot. I folded them carefully and tucked them into the inside pocket of my jacket right next to my heart. I checked the time. I'd been gone for 45 minutes. I had to get back. I had to climb back into that window and pretend to be the victim for just a little longer. But as I walked out of the library, blinking in the harsh afternoon sunlight, I wasn't afraid anymore. The fear had burned away, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They wanted a senile old man. I would give them one. I would give them the performance of a lifetime. I would let them think they were winning right up until the moment the steel trap snapped shut on their necks. Getting back into the house after my trip to the library was harder than getting out. My adrenaline was fading, replaced by the dull ache of arthritis and the terrifying weight of the evidence pressing against my chest. I managed to shimmy through the guest room window and lock it just as the front door beeped, signaling their return. I stripped off my suit jacket, threw on my stained cardigan, and sat in the rocking chair, staring at the wall with a practiced, vacuous expression. But sitting there listening to them unpack takeout in the kitchen, I realized the documents in my pocket weren't enough. I had the financial trail, and I had the poison, but I needed the intent. I needed to hear them say it. I needed to capture the malice in their voices so a jury wouldn't just see a tragedy, but a conspiracy. I needed audio. That night while the house slept, I remembered an old piece of equipment I had kept from my days in the field. It wasn't high-tech spy gear. It was a simple digital voice recorder I used to dictate case notes. I had stashed it years ago in a hollowed-out book in the basement inside a copy of The Wealth of Nations that Justin would never, ever open. The problem was the basement. They had turned it into a storage dump for my life stacking boxes floor to ceiling. To get there, I had to navigate the stairs in the dark without alerting the sensors. At 2 in the morning, I made my move. I descended the stairs by sliding down on my backside step by silent step, minimizing the creaks. The basement air was cool and smelled of damp cardboard. I used a small pen light, shielding the beam with my fingers. I found the bookshelf. I found the book. The recorder was there, batteries long dead, but I had pilfered fresh ones from the TV remote earlier that evening. I put the batteries in. The red light blinked. It still worked. But as I turned to head back upstairs, I froze. The light from the hallway spilled down the staircase. Footsteps. Heavy, angry footsteps. It was Justin. He wasn't coming down. He was pacing the hallway directly above me, talking on his cell phone. I moved to the spot under the vents where the acoustics were best. "I am telling you, S, it is handled," Justin hissed. His voice was vibrating with fear. "The insurance policy is active. We checked the grace period. There is no suicide clause for accidents. If he falls, we get paid." I pressed the record button. My hand was steady, but my stomach was churning acid. I heard a pause. Then Justin spoke again, his voice dropping an octave. "No, the pills are working, but he is like an ox. His heart won't quit. Brittany says we might have to help him along. We were thinking the stairs a slip, a trip on a loose rug. It happens to old people all the time. It is a tragedy, but it is clean." I leaned my head against the cold concrete wall. Hearing it in the abstract was one thing. Hearing your son discuss your murder, like a contractor discussing a demolition, was another. He wasn't just waiting for me to die. He was actively debating the method of execution. "We are going to do it Friday," Justin said. "Friday night, we will say he wandered out of bed. By the time the paramedics get here, it will be over. Just give me until the weekend cell." Friday. Today was Tuesday. I had 3 days. The timeline had just contracted from weeks to hours. I waited until he hung up and went back to bed. The climb back upstairs was agonizing. Every step felt like walking up a mountain. I hid the recorder inside the ventilation duct in the kitchen, taping it securely behind the grate. It was the one room where they felt safe to talk, where the hum of the refrigerator covered their whispers. The next day, Wednesday, the atmosphere in the house shifted. It was subtle, but I felt it. Justin was too nice. He brought me a blanket for my legs. He asked if I wanted to watch old baseball games on TV. It was the kindness of a butcher calming the animal before the slaughter. Brittany was different too. She was meticulously cleaning the house. She wasn't cleaning for hygiene. She was cleaning a crime scene in advance. She scrubbed the floors. She tightened the banister at the top of the stairs. Then, in a moment that made my blood run cold, I watched her loosen the carpet runner on the top step. She used a screwdriver to pry up the tacks, leaving the fabric loose, a perfect trip hazard for a shuffling old man. She tested it with her foot, sliding it back and forth. Then she looked down the long, steep flight of stairs and smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a satisfied smile. The trap was laid. I sat in my chair watching her through half-closed eyes, my mind racing. I couldn't just avoid the stairs. If I didn't fall, they would push me. I needed to trigger their greed before Friday. I needed to make myself more valuable, alive than dead, at least for a few more days. I needed to divert their attention from the insurance payout to something immediate, something they could touch. That was the moment the idea for the ledger solidified. But I needed one more piece of leverage. I needed access to Justin's phone. The recording in the vent was good, but texts were better. Texts were undeniable. An opportunity presented itself that afternoon. Justin was in the backyard pacing, smoking a cigarette he thought I didn't know about. He had left his phone on the coffee table charging. I knew his passcode. I had watched him punch it in 100 times. 1111. He was a simpleton to the bitter end. I shuffled over to the table. I picked up the phone. My heart was hammering against my ribs. If he turned around, if he saw me handling technology with competence, the jig was up. I unlocked it. I went to his messages. There was a thread with S. I scrolled up. It was a litany of threats and fear. S, you are 3 weeks late. The VIG is running. Justin? I know the old man is stubborn. He won't die. S, make him die, or you die. Simple math. Justin, Friday. I promise. Friday, he has an accident. I took a picture of the screen with my own burner phone, which I had hidden in my sleeve. I scrolled further. There were texts to Brittany. Justin, did you up the dose? Brittany, yes. Triple the Warren. If he cuts himself shaving, he will bleed out. Be careful with him. Justin, I don't care if he bleeds out. I care if he signs the check. I took another picture. I had them. I had the conspiracy in black and white text. Suddenly, the back door handle rattled. Justin was coming in. I dropped the phone back onto the table. I didn't have time to lock it. I collapsed into the armchair, letting my head loll to the side, my mouth falling open. Justin walked in. He looked at me, then at the phone. The screen was still illuminated. He frowned. He walked over and picked it up. Dad, he asked, his voice sharp with suspicion. Did you touch my phone? I blinked slowly, looking at him with glazed eyes. I pointed a shaking finger at the television, which was turned off. The man. I mumbled, drool pooling at the corner of my mouth. The man in the box. He stopped talking. Justin stared at me for a long second. He looked at the phone, saw it was on the home screen, and relaxed. He let out a breath of disgust. The TV is off, Dad. You are losing it. You are completely gone. He put the phone in his pocket and walked into the kitchen. I let out a breath I had been holding for a minute. It was too close, but I had the photos. I had the recordings. And I knew the deadline. Friday night. I had 48 hours to write the book, plant it, and get them to court. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I spent the rest of the day in a fever state of composition, drafting the fake assets in my head, planning the layout of the ledger. I knew I had to make the gold seem accessible, but hidden, tempting enough to make them delay the murder, but urgent enough to make them rush the legal process. That night as I lay in bed, I heard them downstairs again. They weren't whispering about murder anymore. They were arguing about what color Porsche they would buy with the insurance money. I want the red one, Brittany said. It looks better on me. Get the red one. Justin replied, the sound of a beer cap popping. Get two. Once he takes that tumble on Friday, we are set for life. I touched the pocket of my pajama top, feeling the hard edge of the burner phone. You're going to get a ride, son, I thought. But it won't be in a Porsche. It will be in a squad car. And the only thing you are going to be set for is a federal indictment. The next morning, I bought the ledger and the writing began. Then I sat at my desk and pulled out the black leather ledger I had bought. It smelled of mildew and old paper, perfect for the prop I needed it to be. For the next 3 nights while Justin and Brittany slept the sleep of the self-righteous, I stayed awake. I didn't take their pills, so my mind was razor sharp. I turned on my desk lamp, draping a towel over the shade to dim the light to a conspiratorial glow, and I began to write a work of fiction. I channeled every paranoid subject I had ever interviewed. I made my handwriting shaky, erratic. I pressed hard on the pen, tearing the paper in places. I created a narrative of a man who didn't trust banks, who didn't trust the government, and who certainly didn't trust his family. On page 3, I detailed a fictional account with the Zurich Cantonal Bank. I invented account numbers that looked mathematically plausible, but led nowhere. I wrote notes in the margins like, "Do not trust the mailman, and they are watching the house." On page 12, I fabricated a shell company in the Cayman Islands called Blue Horizon Assets. I listed a balance of $1.5 million proceeds from a consulting gig in the AS that never happened, but the masterpiece was on page 30. I drew a crude map of the old tool shed in the backyard, a structure that had been torn down 10 years ago. I wrote in jagged, frantic letters, "The bullion is safe. 12 bars gold beneath the concrete slab. They will never find it. $5 million in total imaginary assets. It was ridiculous. It was absurd." But to two people who were drowning in debt and desperate for a quick fix, it would look like salvation. It would look like the answer to their prayers. They would read this and think, "The old man isn't broke. He's holding out on us." And here was the genius of the trap. Between these pages of lunacy, I hid the truth. I took the printed shot showing Justin's crypto wallet transfers the proof he had stolen my pension. I folded it and taped it securely between pages 10 and 11. I took the printout from the pharmaceutical database, identifying the blue pill as rat poison. I taped that between pages 20 and 21. I took the life insurance policy with the double indemnity clause. I taped that near the back, right next to a rambling entry about government drones. I turned the ledger into a Trojan horse. If they wanted to use this book to prove I was incompetent, they would have to submit it into evidence. And by submitting it, they would be handing the judge the physical proof of their own crimes. They would be so blinded by the gold and the Swiss accounts, so eager to show the judge my delusions that they wouldn't bother to read the fine print taped between the pages. By the fourth morning, the book was ready. It looked weathered, filled with the scribblings of a madman. Now I just had to make sure they found it. I waited until Saturday afternoon. Justin was in the living room watching football, nursing a beer. Brittany was in the kitchen. I walked into the den, clutching the book to my chest like a precious artifact. I made sure they saw me. I looked over my shoulder, acting skittish, paranoid. I sat at my desk and opened the book, hunching over it, scribbling nonsense. I muttered to myself loud enough for them to hear, but quiet enough to seem secretive. Safe. It has to be safe. The gold. They can't know. I felt their eyes on me. I saw Justin lower his beer. I saw Brittany pause in the doorway. The bait was in the water. I spent an hour pretending to review my assets. Then I let my head droop. I let my breathing slow and deepen. I feigned the heavy narcotic sleep they were so used to seeing. I let my hands slide off the desk, leaving the book open, exposed. It didn't take long. Didn't. I heard the floorboards creak. I heard the soft intake of breath. Through my eyelashes, kept slit thin, I saw them. Justin and Brittany crept into the room like scavengers. Justin reached out and gently slid the book from under my arm. I let out a snore and shifted but didn't wake. They retreated to the corner of the room, huddling together. I heard the rustle of pages. "Holy cow," Justin whispered, his voice trembling with excitement. "Brittany, look at this. Zurich, the Caymans." "Is it real?" Brittany hissed. "Look at his handwriting. He's losing it." "The numbers look real," Justin argued. "And look at this. Gold bars under the old shed. I knew it. I knew he had money he wasn't telling us about. The cheap old bastard." I heard them flipping pages frantically. They completely ignored the printed sheets taped in the middle. They flipped right past the crypto evidence. They flipped past the poison report. Their eyes were only scanning for dollar signs. Greed is a powerful blinder. "This is it," Justin said, his voice taking on a dark, triumphant edge. "This is exactly what we need. We don't need to wait for him to die of an accident anymore. That takes too long and it's risky. What do you mean? Brittany asked. I mean, we take this book to Judge Henderson, Justin said. We show him the scribblings about government drones and buried gold. It proves he's clinically insane. It proves he's delusional. We get the emergency conservatorship immediately. We get control of everything. And once we have the legal power, we go dig up that gold ourselves. I had to fight to keep a smile off my face. It was working. They were doing exactly what I predicted. They were going to use my fiction to hang themselves. Are you sure? Brittany asked. What if the judge reads the whole thing? He won't. Justin scoffed. Fletcher will present the crazy parts. He'll highlight the paranoia. The judge will see a senile old man hiding millions while his family suffers. He'll hand us the keys to the kingdom. Justin closed the book with a soft thud. I'm taking this. We're calling Fletcher. We're filing the emergency motion on Monday morning. They crept out of the room, taking the black ledger with them. They thought they had just stolen the map to El Dorado. They didn't realize they had just stolen a signed confession. I opened my eyes and sat up in the empty room. I looked at the spot on the desk where the book had been. My hands weren't shaking anymore. The trap was set. The players were in motion. All I had to do now was wait for my day in court and pray that the bailiff had a loud, clear speaking voice. Because when page 45 was read, my son's life as a free man would be over. I waited 10 minutes to ensure they were downstairs celebrating their victory with the bottle of wine they had been saving for a special occasion. I reached under the nightstand and pulled out the tiny, motion-activated camera I had wedged into the power outlet. It was a cheap piece of spy gear I had bought with cash, but the resolution was high enough to capture the pores on a liar's face. I needed to see what I had missed while my eyes were closed. I needed to confirm that the fish hadn't just nibbled the bait, but had swallowed the hook deep into its gullet. I loaded the footage onto my burner phone and watched. On the small screen, the scene played out in stark black and white. I saw the door cack open. I saw Justin's face tight with adrenaline and malice. I saw Brittany pointing at the ledger on the desk, her mouth forming the word look. But what fascinated me, what the forensic part of my brain dissected frame by frame, was the body language. When Justin opened that book and saw the map of the buried gold, his pupils dilated so wide they looked like black holes. His posture shifted from the crouch of a thief to the swagger of a millionaire. He wasn't looking at a notebook. He was looking at his salvation. I fast-forwarded to the audio I had captured from the bug I'd planted in the kitchen light fixture earlier that week. The quality was tiny, but their voices cut through the static with crystal clarity. They were sitting at the island, the ledger open between them like a holy text. "It is all here, Brittany Justin," said his voice thick with the slur of cheap champagne. 5 million, 5 million. The old man has been sitting on a fortune while we were drowning. He dug a hole in the yard and buried gold bars like a pirate while I was begging S for more time. "He is sick, Justin?" Brittany replied, the sound of a glass clinking against the counter. "Look at this handwriting. He thinks the government is watching him with drones. He thinks the mailman is a spy. This is full-blown dementia." "Good," Justin snapped. "That is exactly what we need. If he was saying he could fight us. But this book, this is proof he is mentally incompetent. This is our golden ticket. We don't have to wait for the pills to work. We don't have to risk an autopsy finding the wearin. We take this to court on Monday. We show the judge the crazy ramblings about Swiss accounts and buried treasure. We get emergency conservatorship. Conservatorship, the legal equivalent of a straitjacket. It would give him the power to sign checks in my name, sell my property, and institutionalize me against my will. It was the nuclear option, and he was choosing it because he was greedy, because he didn't want to wait for me to die to get the money. He wanted the gold. Now I heard the rustle of pages on the recording. "We have to be smart," Justin continued. We tell Fletcher that Dad is a danger to himself. We say he is squandering the estate on gambling and burying the rest in the yard. We use the book as Exhibit A. Once the judge signs that order, I am the legal guardian. I can dig up that gold the next day and nobody will ask questions. I can pay off S, buy a new Porsche, and put Dad in the cheapest state-run facility I can find. I smiled in the darkness of my room. It was a cold, hard smile. He had made the classic mistake of the amateur criminal. He had accelerated the timeline by rushing to court. He was bringing the authorities into the equation. He was inviting a judge to look at the evidence. He thought the evidence pointed to my insanity. He didn't realize it pointed to his felony. The weekend passed in a surreal haze of false normalcy. Justin and Brittany were almost giddy. They treated me with a new kind of condescension, the way you treat a toddler who doesn't know he is about to get a shot at the doctor. They fed me my vitamins with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. I cheated every single one, adding them to my collection in the lamp base. I spent Sunday sitting in the garden staring at the spot where the old tool shed used to be the spot where I had claimed the gold was buried. I saw Justin watching me from the kitchen window. He was probably mentally calculating how deep he would have to dig. I let him watch. I even paced off a few steps and nodded to myself, reinforcing his delusion. Monday morning arrived with a knock on the door. It wasn't the police. It was a process server. A bored-looking man in a windbreaker handed me a thick envelope. Harrison Caldwell, you have been served. I took the envelope with a shaking hand, playing my part for the audience of neighbors who might be watching. Justin came out onto the porch, feigning shock. Dad, who was that? What is going on? I opened the envelope. It was the emergency motion for conservatorship. The hearing was set for Thursday. They had moved fast. Fletcher must have called in favors. Oh no, Dad, Justin said, reading over my shoulder, his voice dripping with fake concern. It looks like the court wants to review your situation. Don't worry, I will handle it. I will make sure you are taken care of. I looked at him, letting my lower lip tremble. I don't understand, Justin. Why do I have to go to court? Did I do something wrong? He put an arm around my shoulder, guiding me back inside. No, Dad. You were just sick. You were confused. This is for your own good. We just want to make sure you are safe. Safe from yourself. I let him lead me into the house. I let him sit me down. I let him explain how he was going to help me manage my affairs. Inside my heart was beating a steady, powerful rhythm. He had done it. He had filed the paperwork. He had sworn under oath that the evidence in that notebook was real. He had locked himself into a story he couldn't escape. That night I packed a small bag, not clothes evidence. I took the crushed pills from the lamp. I took the printed financial records from the lining of my coat. I organized them into a neat stack. I didn't need to run anymore. I didn't need to hide. The trap was set. The bait was taken, and the cage door had slammed shut. All that was left was the show, and I intended to give Judge Henderson a performance he would never forget. As I lay in bed Tuesday night listening to Justin and Brittany laughing downstairs, clinking glasses to their future wealth, I felt a strange sense of peace. They were celebrating their victory. They didn't know they were celebrating their own funeral. The fish had bitten. Now it was time to reel him in. The courtroom air was stifling, heavy with the scent of floor wax and the silent tension of a life hanging in the balance. Thaddeus Fletcher, my son's lawyer, stood in the center of the room like a ringmaster presenting his star attraction. In his hand, he held the black leather ledger I had spent 3 sleepless nights creating. He held it aloft, not just as evidence, but as a trophy. Your Honor, Fletcher boomed, his voice echoing off the mahogany paneling. We have heard testimony about Mr. Caldwell's erratic behavior. We have seen the photos of his confusion in public spaces. But this document, is the definitive proof of his complete detachment from reality. He walked toward the bench, clutching the book with a theatrical gravity. This journal was found on Mr. Caldwell's desk by his concerned son. It contains the ramblings of a mind that has unfortunately lost its tether to the real world. Inside these pages, Mr. Caldwell details vast fortunes that simply do not exist. He writes of Swiss bank accounts with millions of dollars. He describes shell companies in the Cayman Islands. And most disturbingly, he has drawn detailed maps of buried gold bullion in his own backyard. A ripple of murmurs went through the few people in the gallery. I saw Brittany press a handkerchief to her dry eyes, shaking her head in mock sorrow. She was playing the part of the heartbroken daughter-in-law to perfection. Fletcher continued, his voice dropping to a sympathetic register that made my skin crawl. These are not just harmless fantasies, Your Honor. These are delusions of grandeur. Mr. Caldwell believes he is a wealthy tycoon hiding assets from government drones. He believes his own family is spying on him. This level of paranoia, combined with his refusal to take his prescribed medication, makes him a danger to himself and his estate. We request that this ledger be sealed to protect the family's privacy during this difficult time. And we ask the court to grant immediate and full conservatorship to Justin Caldwell so he can manage what little real assets remain before they are squandered on these fantasies. He handed the ledger to the bailiff, who passed it up to Judge Henderson. The judge, a man with the face carved from granite and eyes that had seen every variety of human deceit, took the book. He put on his reading glasses and opened the cover. I watched him. I watched his eyes scan the first few pages. I saw his brow furrow as he read my fabricated notes about the Zurich accounts. I saw him flip to page 30, the map of the buried gold. He shook his head slightly, a gesture of weary resignation. He looked up at me, and for the first time I saw pity in his eyes. He saw a broken old man who had retreated into a fantasy world to escape the loneliness of grief. Mr. Caldwell, the judge said, his voice gentle, almost kind. Do you recognize this book? I looked at the ledger. It was the trap I had built with my own hands. Yes, Your Honor, I said, keeping my voice thin and tremulous. It is my private journal. Justin, sitting at the plaintiff's table, let out a breath he had been holding. He leaned back in his chair, a smug satisfaction radiating from him like heat. He looked at me and winked. A quick, subtle drop of the eyelid that screamed victory. He thought it was over. He thought the judge had seen the madness and now the gavel would fall, handing him control of my life. He was already spending the gold he thought was buried in the yard. He was already planning the excavation. I took a deep breath. I let the tremor in my hands still. I straightened my spine, shedding the posture of the invalid I had played for weeks. I looked directly at Judge Henderson, and I let the mask fall away. Your Honor? I continued, my voice suddenly strong, clear, and resonant, stripped of all the feigned weakness. I agree with Mr. Fletcher. That book is the most important piece of evidence in this courtroom. It does contain a detailed list of assets, but the gold and the Swiss accounts, those are fiction. I wrote them to test a theory. Fletcher frowned, sensing a shift in the wind. Justin sat up straighter, the smirk faltering on his lips. The judge narrowed his eyes, confused by the sudden change in my demeanor. A theory, Mr. Caldwell? Yes, sir. A theory that my son and his wife were not interested in my well-being, but in my net worth. A theory that they would steal anything that wasn't nailed down. And they proved me right. They stole that book from my desk while I pretended to sleep. They didn't read it to help me. They read it to find out how much I was worth. Objection, Fletcher shouted, jumping to his feet. Relevance. Mr. Caldwell is clearly rambling again. Overruled. Henderson snapped, his curiosity piqued. Continue, Mr. Caldwell. I stood up, fully gripping the edge of the table, not for support, but for emphasis. That book is a honeypot, Your Honor. The first 40 pages are lies designed to catch greedy thieves. But if you want to know what is actually happening in my house, if you want to know where the real money went, I ask that you direct the bailiff to turn to page 45. Justin's face went pale. He looked at Brittany, panic flaring in his eyes. He didn't know what was on page 45. He hadn't read that far. He had stopped at the gold. "Please, Your Honor," I said, pointing a steady finger at the ledger. "Read page 45 out loud. Let the court hear the true inventory of my son's inheritance." The judge looked at me, then at the book. He nodded to the bailiff. "Bailiff, please read from page 45. The bailiff, a burly man who looked like he would rather be anywhere else, flipped through the pages. He passed the map of the shed. He passed the Cayman Island codes. He stopped at a page marked with a red sticky note. He cleared his throat. The room went deathly silent. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause. Item 1. The bailiff read, his voice booming in the quiet room. Date May 12th. Unauthorized wire transfer. $50,000 withdrawn from the pension fund of Harrison Caldwell. Forged signature confirmed. Destination crypto wallet ending in Alpha 94. Owner of wallet Justin Caldwell. Justin froze. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. He gripped the table, his knuckles white. The bailiff continued. Item 2, date May 20th. Laboratory analysis of medication provided by Brittany Caldwell. Pill identifier PL442. Substance identified as warfarin sodium phenylbromide. Rat poison. Patient has no history of clotting disorders. Intent, fatal hemorrhage. A gasp went up from the gallery. Brittany let out a small, strangled cry and covered her mouth with her hand. Her eyes were wide, terrified saucers, darting around the room as if looking for an exit. Item 3. The BOF read, Relentless. Audio transcript dated May 25th. Recording device planted in kitchen. Male voice identified as Justin Caldwell. Quote, "The old man is taking too long to die. If the pills don't work by Friday, we shove him down the stairs. The insurance policy pays double for accidental death." The bailiff paused. He reached into the book and pulled out a small silver USB drive that had been taped to the page. Attached is the digital audio file and the full toxicology report. Pandemonium threatened to erupt, but the silence held it back, a heavy, suffocating blanket of shock. Fletcher was slowly backing away from the table, putting distance between himself and his clients. He knew when a ship was sinking, and this one had just hit an iceberg. Judge Henderson's face had turned a deep, furious shade of red. He looked up from the book, his eyes locking onto Justin. The pity was gone, replaced by the cold, hard glare of the law. Justin tried to stand up. "Dad." He stammered, his voice high and hysterical. "Dad, that is not real. You made it up. You're crazy. Tell them you are crazy." I looked at him. I looked at the son. I had raised the boy. I had loved the man who had tried to murder me for a payout. "I am not crazy, Justin," I said softly, my voice carrying across the silent room. "I am a forensic accountant, and I just audited you." Judge Henderson sat there for a long, agonizing minute, his eyes darting back and forth across the toxicology report and the transcript of the death threat. His face, usually a mask of judicial impartiality, began to flush a deep, venous crimson. He was a man who prided himself on the sanctity of his courtroom, on the order of the law, and he was realizing in real time that two people had walked into his house of justice and tried to use him as the murder weapon. He realized that if he had signed that conservatorship order, he would have been an accessory to my death. The paper in his hand shook not from age, but from a fury so intense it seemed to raise the temperature in the room. He dropped the papers onto the bench. They scattered like autumn leaves. He grabbed his gavel not by the handle but by the head, and slammed it down onto the striking block with a force that made the wood splinter. The sound was not a tap. It was a crack of thunder that made everyone in the room jump. Bailiff the judge roared, his voice booming without the aid of the microphone. "Lock the doors! Nobody leaves this room. Secure the exits immediately." Officer Miller moved with surprising speed for a man of his size, putting his back against the double doors and resting his hand on his holstered taser. "This is no longer a civil hearing regarding a conservatorship," Henderson announced, standing up his black robes billowing like a storm cloud. "This is now a crime scene. We are in the presence of prima facie evidence of conspiracy to commit capital murder, wire fraud, and elder abuse. Clerk called the sheriff's department. Tell them to send a unit. Tell them to send 2. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly from legal tension to primal chaos. Justin, who had been staring at the table in a catatonic state of shock, suddenly snapped. The reality of the situation hit him like a physical blow. He wasn't getting the house. He wasn't getting the gold. He wasn't getting the insurance payout. He was going to prison. The walls were closing in, and his fight-or-flight response kicked in with a desperate, irrational ferocity. He scrambled out of his chair, knocking it backward with a loud clatter. He didn't look at the judge. He didn't look at the Bailiff. He looked at me. His eyes were wide with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. He pointed a shaking finger at me, his face twisting into an ugly snarl. "You," Justin screamed, spit flying from his mouth. "You set me up, you crazy old bat. You set me up. That book was mine. You wrote it for me." He lunged. He actually lunged across the aisle, scrambling over the low wooden partition that separated the plaintiff and defense tables. He was coming for my throat. He wanted to silence the witness. He wanted to destroy the evidence that was breathing right in front of him. "Dad, you are insane," he shrieked, reaching for me. "Tell them you are insane." I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I sat there calm and collected, watching my son destroy the last shred of his humanity. I knew he wouldn't reach me. Before he could take 2 steps, Officer Miller was on him. The Bailiff tackled him from the side, a wall of muscle hitting him with the force of a freight train. They went down hard, crashing into the defense table, sending papers and water pitchers flying. Justin thrashed and kicked, screaming obscenities, screaming that I was the villain and that I had tricked him. "Get off me!" Justin yelled, his face pressed against the linoleum floor. "He tricked me. He planted that stuff. He is the criminal. He is lying. Stop resisting." Miller barked, wrenching Justin's arm behind his back. I watched as Brittany tried to stand up, perhaps to run, perhaps to help him. But she fainted dead away, sliding out of her chair and crumpling into a heap of black fabric on the floor. No one rushed to help her. All eyes were on the man being handcuffed on the ground. The click of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was a sound I had heard 1,000 times in my career. But hearing it applied to my own son was a sound that tore something loose in my chest. It was the sound of a final, irrevocable failure. Not mine, but ours. Miller hauled Justin to his feet. My son was disheveled, his expensive suit dusty, his tie crooked, his face red and streaked with sweat. He was panting, looking around the room like a trapped animal looking for an escape route that didn't exist. Finally, his eyes locked on mine again. "Why, Dad?" He wheezed, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a pathetic, whining confusion. "Why did you do this? Why did you write all that fake stuff about the gold? Why did you lie to us?" I stood up slowly. My legs were steady. My hands were still. I walked around the table, stepping over the spilled water until I was standing 2 feet away from him. I looked him up and down, taking in the man who had sold his soul for a crypto wallet and a luxury car. "I didn't lie to you, Justin." I said, my voice projecting clearly to the judge, the court reporter, and the silent gallery. I wrote a ledger. I left it on my desk. You stole it. You broke into my room while you thought I was drugged, and you stole it. I reached out and took the black book from the judge's bench where it had been resting. I held it up, showing him the battered cover. You thought this was a map to a fortune. I continued, my tone hard and unforgiving. You thought it was a list of assets you could plunder. You saw gold bars and Swiss accounts because that is what you wanted to see. Your greed blinded you to the truth. I opened the book to page 45 and held it up so he could see the taped-in evidence one last time. This isn't a list of my assets, son. This is a list of your crimes. It is an indictment. It is a daily log of every time you stole from me, every time you lied to me, and every time you tried to kill me. Justin stared at the book, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly. I spent 2 months playing the part of the fool, I said, leaning in closer, so only he could hear the steel in my voice. I let you starve me. I let you isolate me. I let you drug me until I couldn't remember my own name. I did it so I could gather enough evidence to make sure you never hurt anyone ever again. I used my life as bait and you swallowed it whole. I snapped the book shut with a finality that echoed in the room. You wanted my power of attorney, Justin? You wanted to make decisions for me. Well, I made a decision for you. I decided to introduce you to the consequences of your actions, and you just delivered yourself to them, gift wrapped in your own arrogance. Justin slumped in the Bailiff's grip, his knees buckling. He began to sob, ugly, heaving sobs of a man who realizes the game is over and he has lost everything. Judge Henderson looked down from the bench. Officer Miller, take the defendant into the holding cell and call an ambulance for the woman, but keep her in custody. She is a flight risk and a danger to the public. As they dragged Justin away, his shoes squeaking on the floor, he looked back at me one last time. The look wasn't anger anymore. It was pure despair. I watched him go. I watched the doors swing shut behind him. I stood alone in the center of the courtroom, holding the black book. I had won. I had saved my life. I had saved my estate. But as I looked at the empty chair where my son had sat, I realized that in the process of saving myself, I had lost the only family I had left. The victory tasted like ash in my mouth, but it was the only flavor I had left. The trap had worked perfectly, and now I was the only one left standing to reset it. The sound of justice isn't a gavel banging. It is the click of handcuffs and the robotic recitation of Miranda rights. I stood there leaning against the defense table, watching the final act of the tragedy play out. Justin didn't fight anymore. The fight had left him the moment the bailiff read page 45. He stood slumped, his expensive suit rumpled his hands, cuffed behind his back, listening as the officer listed the charges. Fraud, elder abuse. Grand larceny conspiracy to commit capital murder. Each charge was a brick in the wall that would separate us for the rest of his life. He didn't look at me. He stared at his shoes, weeping silently, a broken man who realized too late that the smartest person in the room wasn't the one with the loudest voice, but the one taking the notes. Brittany was wheeled out on a gurney, a police officer walking beside her. She wasn't unconscious, but she was catatonic with shock. The reality of prison, of losing her nursing license, of giving birth in a federal medical facility, had shut her mind down. She was charged with the same crimes, plus the unauthorized administration of a controlled substance. She had used her medical training as a weapon, and now the law was going to use it as an aggravating factor to ensure she never saw the outside of a cell for 20 years. Then there was Fletcher, the lawyer who had stood so tall, accusing me of insanity. He was sweating through his cheap suit, trying to stuff papers into his briefcase, trying to disappear. But Judge Henderson wasn't done. Mr. Fletcher, the judge, boomed, his voice echoing in the chamber. You presented forged documents to this court. You filed a motion based on evidence you did not verify. You are either grossly incompetent or criminally complicit. I am referring this entire transcript to the State Bar Association with a recommendation for immediate disbarment. Do not leave the jurisdiction." Fletcher nodded weakly, his career turning to ash in seconds. He skewered out the side door, a rat fleeing a sinking ship, leaving his clients to drown. I picked up my black ledger. I walked out of the courtroom, passing the prosecutor, who gave me a solemn nod. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped out into the hallway. The air was cooler out here, free of the stench of lies. I walked down the courthouse steps and into the afternoon sun. It should have been a moment of triumph. I had won. I had defeated the enemies who tried to kill me. I had saved my fortune. But as I stood on the sidewalk watching the police cruiser pull away with my son in the back seat, I didn't feel like a victor. I felt a profound aching hollowness. I had saved my life, yes, but I had lost my legacy. I had lost the future I thought I was building. The victory was sterile. It was necessary. Absolutely necessary, but it tasted like dust. That is the price of this kind of justice. You survive, but you survive alone. I didn't go back to the house that night. I checked into a hotel. I couldn't bear to walk past the kitchen where they had plotted my death. I couldn't sleep in the room where I had feigned madness. To understand the full extent of the wreckage my son left behind, you have to look at the days immediately following the trial. The adrenaline of the courtroom victory had faded, leaving behind a silence in the house that was louder than any screaming match. I was alone in a 4-bedroom colonial that felt like a mausoleum. The police had removed the evidence, but they couldn't remove the ghosts. I spent the first week doing what forensic accountants do best, auditing the physical remains of the crime scene. I went room by room. In the guest room closet, buried under a pile of Britney's designer shoes, I found a shoebox. Inside wasn't money. It was pawn slips, dozens of them. I picked up the top one. Mahogany grandfather clock, $400. My heart stopped. The clock Martha had loved, the one they told me was at the repair shop, had been sold for a fraction of its value to a pawn shop on 5th Street. I flipped through the others. Martha's pearl necklace. My vintage like a camera. Even the silverware we had received as a wedding gift in 1978. They hadn't just stolen my future. They had liquidated my past for pennies on the dollar to feed a crypto account and a gambling addiction. I sat on the floor of the closet, clutching those slips, feeling a fresh wave of grief. But I didn't have time to mourn because the next day, a black Cadillac Escalade pulled into my driveway. I was in the kitchen packing boxes when I heard the heavy slam of a car door. I looked out the window. A man was walking up the path. He was big, wearing a leather jacket that was too warm for the weather, and he walked with the arrogant stride of a man who is used to people moving out of his way. I knew who sent him. Justin's debt didn't vanish just because Justin went to jail. S wanted his money. I didn't call the police. I didn't lock the door. I opened it before he could knock. "Harrison Caldwell?" the man asked. His voice was like gravel in a blender. "That's me," I said, leaning against the doorframe, projecting a calm I didn't feel. "I'm here for a friend," he said, smiling a smile that showed too many teeth. "Your son, Justin. He owes some money, a significant amount, $800,000, give or take the vig. My boss S figures since you have all that gold, Justin talked about maybe you want to settle the family debt, keep things peaceful." He stepped forward, expecting me to back down, expecting the frail old man Justin had described. I didn't move. "You must be Vincent," I said. The man froze. His smile dropped. "How do you know my name, Vincent Moretti?" I continued reciting the data I had memorized from my deep dive into Justin's phone contacts and the cross-referenced police databases I still had back-end access to. 2 prior convictions for assault, 1 for extortion. Currently employed by Salvatore Sal Gambino as a consultant. You drive a 2021 Escalade license plate number Kilo Whiskey 92. and you are currently on parole. Vincent took a half step back, his hand twitching toward his waistband. You verify a lot of things for a retired guy. I am a forensic accountant, Vincent. I said, my voice hard as steel. I follow money. And when I followed my son's money, I found S. I found the crypto wallet S uses to launder his sportsbook profits. I found the offshore accounts in buys. And most importantly, I found the wire transfers linking S directly to a federal racketeering investigation in New Jersey. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a plain white envelope. I held it out to him. What is this? He asked, suspicious. That is a copy of the dossier I sent to the FBI Cyber Crimes Division yesterday morning. I lied. It wasn't with the FBI yet. It was in my safe, but he didn't know that. It details every transaction between my son and your boss. It connects the loan sharking to the money laundering. If anything happens to me, if you take one step into this house, or if S ever contacts me again, a second key is turned, and the original digital files go to the district attorney. Vincent stared at the envelope. He stared at me. He looked at the quiet suburban street, then back at the old man who was looking at him with the eyes of a predator, not prey. He snatched the envelope from my hand. He opened it, scanning the first page. It was a flow chart of S's operation, detailed down to the decimal point. His face palled. He realized they had been exposed by the clueless old man they thought was an easy mark. Tell S the debt is canceled, I said quietly. Consider it a consulting fee for me not sending him to prison for 20 years. Now get off my property. Vincent didn't argue. He didn't threaten. He turned around, walked back to his Cadillac, and drove away, without looking back. I closed the door and locked it. My hands were shaking then just a little, but I had cleared this board. The threats were gone. There was only one loose end left. 3 weeks later, before I left for Florida, I made one final stop at the county detention center. Justin was sitting behind the plexiglass. He looked terrible. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the hollow, haunted look of a man who knows he has thrown his life away. When he saw me, he picked up the receiver. "Dad," he croaked. "You came?" "I came to say goodbye. Justin," I said, "I'm moving to Florida tomorrow." He leaned forward, desperate. "Dad, please, you have to help me. Brittany is testifying against me to get a reduced sentence. She is pinning it all on me. You have to get me a better lawyer. Fletcher abandoned me. I need money for a real defense." I looked at him. Even now, in an orange jumpsuit facing conspiracy charges, his first instinct was to ask for my checkbook. He hadn't learned. He hadn't changed. "I can't help you, son." I said I used the money. "What?" He blinked. "What? Money, the gold." "There was no gold, Justin. You know that? But I did recover the crypto you stole, and I liquidated the assets you pawned, so you have it." His eyes lit up. "You can bail me out. We can fight this. I donated it," I said. The silence on the line was deafening. "I started a foundation," I continued. "It helps elderly victims of financial abuse recover their stolen assets and put their abusers in jail. Every dime you tried to steal from me is now being used to catch people just like you." Justin stared at me, his mouth open. The irony hit him like a physical blow. The money he had tried to kill me for was now funding his own destruction. "Why?" he whispered. "I'm your son." "That is why," I replied, standing up. "Because I failed to teach you the value of honesty. So now I am going to use your inheritance to teach the world." I hung up the phone. I didn't look back as I walked out of the visitation room. I walked out into the sunlight, got into my car, and pointed it south. The rearview mirror showed the gray walls of the prison fading into the distance. I wasn't leaving my son behind. I was leaving the thief who had taken his place. And as the miles rolled by and the air turned salty and warm, I finally felt the weight lift. I had cleaned the ledger. The balance was zero, and I was free. 6 months have passed since that day. The wheels of justice grind slow, but they grind exceedingly fine. Justin and Brittany are currently awaiting trial denied bail due to the flight risk and the severity of the charges. The evidence I gathered, the crypto trails, and the toxicology reports is bulletproof. They are going to prison for a long, long time. It is evening now. The sun is setting, painting the water in shades of violet and gold. I am sitting on my balcony, the warm breeze ruffling the collar of my linen shirt. On the table next to me sits a glass of wine, a vintage Cabernet deep and red. I poured it myself. I watched the seal break. I know exactly what is in it. It tastes like grapes and oak, not betrayal and Warren. It tastes like freedom. I am not retired, not really. A mind like mine doesn't just stop. I opened my laptop and logged into my secure email server. The inbox is full, but it isn't spam. It isn't bills. The subject lines read, "Help needed in Ohio. My daughter is stealing my pension. Power of attorney abuse in Texas." I opened the first email. It is from a woman named Agnes. She says her son took over her finances after her husband died, and now she can't buy groceries. She thinks she is going crazy because money keeps disappearing. I smiled. A small, sad, but determined smile. I typed a reply. "Agnes, do not confront him yet. I need you to look for bank statements in the trash. I need you to check your credit report. I am going to help you build a trap." I hit send. This is my life now. I used the fictional $5 million, which turned out to be quite real once I liquidated my assets and recovered the stolen crypto, to start the Caldwell Foundation. We provide forensic accounting services and legal support to the elderly who are being financially abused by their families. I am building a network. I am teaching them how to spot the signs, how to recognize the gaslighting, how to document the theft. I am turning victims into investigators. I took a sip of wine and looked out at the horizon. Justin thought I was a clueless old man. He thought he could outsmart me because he was young and I was tired. He forgot who I was. He forgot where he came from. I am not alone. I have a mission. I have a purpose. And every time I help someone like Agnes put a greedy child behind bars, I feel a little bit of that weight lift from my chest. They say you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Maybe that is true, but you certainly can't trick an old dog who spent 40 years learning every trick in the book. I close the laptop. The ledger is balanced. The case is closed. And for the first time in a long time, I am ready for whatever tomorrow brings. Because nobody, and I mean nobody, gets away with lying to the man who wrote the book on catching liars. The greatest lesson I learned isn't about suspicion. It is about awareness. Blood may be thicker than water, but it should never be a blindfold. We often excuse the cruelty of those we love, mistaking manipulation for concern. But when someone tries to isolate you, control your finances, or make you doubt your own sanity, that isn't love, it is theft. Age might slow our bodies, but we must never let it strip away our dignity. Protecting yourself against evil, even when it wears the face of your own child, is not selfish. It is the final necessary act of respect for the life you have built. My story has ended, but for many, the nightmare is just beginning in silence. If this story opened your eyes, please hit like and subscribe to help spread the truth. Have you ever faced betrayal from those closest to you? Share your story in the comments below. You are not alone, and together we are stronger.